Welcome back to the Deep 404. And some other news for Ukraine, which is bad for their forces. Reportedly around Avdiivka, the industrial coke mining town, the Russians have been given the green light to take the limits off their ammunition levels. So obviously across the front line, both Ukraine and Russia have to conserve the number of shells that they have, and they have limits upon how many can be fired each day. Reports are that in Avdiivka now, that limit has been removed, which means that they are reportedly now able to target even single men. So if they identify a single Ukrainian soldier in some area, the Russians are okay if they believe they can take a shot with artillery and expend shells on that now. So this is clearly bad sign for Ukraine if they are in a position where we get reports from through Ukrainian sources, Ukrainian telegram channels, of soldiers suggesting that they are unable to return artillery fire anywhere near what the Russians are sending at them. And if the Russians are now suggesting that they were operating under limits, and those limits have now been removed in Avdiivka. This is probably able to occur now, not something, the targeting of a single person with artillery, not something that would have happened in the past, but now in this conflict, in the developments we've seen with reconnaissance drones, the capability that small, cheap FPV reconnaissance drones provide to artillery gunners now has completely lifted their ability to be able to improve their accuracy dramatically. Now with a single shot, they can target, with a single small locations, and perhaps then with just a second shot after the first one being a correction, assisted by a drone which is in the air over the target, they are able to now become far more accurate and expend less shells than they would have in the past. Obviously, artillery still has some limitations in that area, but it is a weapon system which is able to shoot beyond its visual range. So it does often rely on reconnaissance in order to hit targets. And now with that advanced FPV drone reconnaissance capability, we're seeing far more accurate artillery use. Also, the pairing up now of groups like Grad rocket launcher systems, things like that. They will now pair up with a drone defense team and drone reconnaissance. So they will have one group of drones out in front, providing them with correction data on where they're firing at or where they're targeting. And then to protect them, they will have a drone defense unit, which will have anti-drone detection technology, some sort of radar, I presume, which is able to detect small enemy drones in the area. If they're detected, they will then fire out a burst of electromagnetic signal scrambling towards the drone to attempt to disable it, cause it to crash to the ground, or cause it to not be able to see and return video footage to its pilot. I'm not sure exactly the way that these are working and how they're disabling the drones, but they're capable of disabling enemy drones. There's even video footage today of a couple of instances of Russian drones reportedly taking out Ukrainian drones by themselves with a drone. So a drone was flying into another drone and causing that drone to be taken out. And there was a couple of videos that have come out of that. So we just see how now that drone capability has become really the game changer, the thing that has changed the way and some of the mathematics of war. If you now are able to expend 1 or 2 shells to hit a target, in some cases even moving targets, whereas in the past that might have taken you 10 or 15 shells, the economics of war just becomes far greater for you now. And so if you are able to produce more ammunition than your opponent, and able to freely use it, then you have a serious advantage in an artillery war of attrition, which is what this fight in Ukraine is. It is an attrition war where Ukraine and Russia are attempting to take out each other's artillery and destroy each other's ground forces and equipment with artillery, primarily. That now, of course, being supported and perhaps even some areas superseded by the use of FPV drones, who are now even more efficient. A single drone has a very high likelihood of taking out a target and taking out, a precisely chosen expensive target. One drone, one tank is what the equation's coming down to, versus, one tank, maybe 15 or 20 shells to get it. And even that number, as I say, is decreasing now with the use of drone reconnaissance. So, there are reports that the Russians really do have an ammunition overload in comparison to the Ukrainians. We might just go to... I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been going on in Israel as well, a little bit later in this video, but I'll just talk a little bit now. I'm just going to run briefly through the weekly summary from the Russian Ministry of Defense. So, the Russian Ministry of Defense provides a daily summary of activity across all the areas of the Ukrainian battlefront. This includes reports on Ukrainian losses, where attacks have happened, and the Ukrainian brigades that have been engaged by the Russians. The Russians don't provide information on their own losses, so we don't have that information, but we do have information about the Ukrainian losses of equipment and manpower. The manpower numbers that are reported here are a combination of killed and wounded, and as I often say, take these numbers with the level of skepticism that you feel is warranted, because these numbers do come from the Russian Ministry of Defense. I use them because they are at least consistent in that we do receive them each day. And we perhaps get to see consistent trends anyhow. And there are ways to back up these Russian numbers. Now, Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, has said that these numbers, at least in part, for the lost servicemen killed and wounded, the Russians obtain them through intercepted Ukrainian communications. So they aren't just guesses and estimates from what's been seen on the ground. It appears that they get these numbers by intercepting Ukrainian communications back up to their higher chains of command somehow. And I don't know how they get these communications, but that's reportedly how they do. We do have the ability to, at least in some cases, also corroborate some of the claims by the Russian Ministry of Defense. In some cases, there will be reports of particular pieces of equipment that have been destroyed, particular pieces of Western or NATO supplied equipment, perhaps, and then there will be video evidence of that. Now, I'm not saying that that confirms all of the Russian reporting, but in its consistency and with the ability to confirm some of it, and just by looking at some of the information that's coming out, like some of the video that's coming out today. Today I saw from one group, I think DDG Politics, who put out a 2-hour-long compilation of video that they have collected, just giving an indication of the Ukrainian losses. Now, it's not really a accurate quantitative investigation or report, other than it just shows images that indicate large losses. For example, it starts off, and for the first couple of minutes, it is just footage panning across fields of Ukrainian freshly dug and filled graves, fields filled with Ukrainian flags and freshly dug mounds of dirt, and families walking through them. And while I can't verify if some of the footage is repeated in just different angles of the same graveyards, it may be, but regardless, these numbers are large, and you can see that for yourself if you go and look on some of the Ukrainian channels and you find the DD Geopolitics video. So these numbers that we'll go through today have at least some level of substantiation, I guess, or corroboration behind them. Starting in the Kupyansk direction, this is in the northern line. This is where the units of the Zapad Group of Forces are operating. They have been using aviation, artillery and heavy flamethrowers. Now, the heavy flamethrowers are the TOS-1 thermobaric systems. For the last 6 months at least, I think it has been constantly reported that in these areas, the Russians are using these TOS-1 Solon-speak flamethrower systems. We don't get an indication of exactly how many of these are fired each day, but they are used day in and day out. That in itself just gives an indication of the size of the Russian weaponry, the overmatching of weaponry and artillery and weapon systems that they have in this conflict. And I say this here because the Ukrainians don't have a similar weapon capability which they're firing back at the Russians. The Ukrainians don't have this heavy flamethrower system. They're not able to reply and respond with this, and yet day in and day out the Russians are using these on Ukrainian positions. Anyhow, fighting in this area close to Sinkovka, Ivanovka and Nevskoye. The Ministry of Defence reports that Ukrainian losses amounted to more than 480 Ukrainian troops killed and wounded. Now, this is from the period of the 3rd of December to the 8th of December 2023. 3 tanks, 13 armoured fighting vehicles, 12 motor vehicles and 7 field artillery guns. Now, obviously the men that are lost and the field artillery guns are perhaps the most important pieces of information that we get from here, given that this is, as we said, a war of attrition, an artillery war in a very large sense. Moving down to the Krasny Liman direction, this is where the Center Group of Forces operate. They have been operating along the front line near Ivanovka, and they have been engaged in strikes against the Ukrainian 95th Air Assault, 63rd and 66th Mechanised Brigades, the 12th Special Forces Brigade near to Kharkov, Nevskoye, Yampol and Serebryanka. Reportedly here, the Ukrainian losses for the week are more than 1,445 troops, 11 armoured fighting vehicles, 17 motor vehicles, and 5 more field artillery guns. As we then move down to the area of perhaps the heaviest fighting in the week, the Donetsk direction, which is where the Yug group of forces operate. Here, in the areas of Mariinka, Kupyansk, Bogdanovka, Avdiivka and Kleshchevka. Avdiivka and Kleshchevka are just south of Bakhmut areas, which the Ukrainians in the offensive, in the June offensive, fought very hard for. Captured Avdiivka, pushed the Russians out and back over the railway line, pushed the Russians out of Kleshchevka. The Russians have now in the last couple of weeks recaptured these areas. They have pushed the Ukrainians back out of Avdiivka, making it a grey zone again. And in Kleshchevka, the Russians are assuming control over the northern heights of Kleshchevka, which gives them then the opportunity to direct their operations in a better sense, because they can now look down over the rest of Kleshchevka. So in these areas in the Donetsk region, Mariinka has been captured by the Russians. There may be 1 or 2 tiny Ukrainian outposts in the far west. Perhaps still, I haven't checked the updating of Mariinka today, but to all intents and purposes, Mariinka has now been lost by the Ukrainians, and Mariinka has been sort of Ukrainian controlled and fought for since 2014. So this is a major loss for it to now be in Russian hands for the Ukrainians. In this Donetsk direction, reportedly, the lost numbers of Ukrainian troops killed and wounded is over 1,560 troops this week, 12 armoured fighting vehicles, 17 motor vehicles, and 22 field artillery guns. So, that's averaging more than 3 pieces of artillery equipment per day being lost. If we move down and to the west, to the South Donetsk region, This is where the Vostok Group of Forces operate. They have been engaging a number of brigades, the 72nd, 79th, 58th and 23rd, near Novomikhalovka, Urozhaine, and over the week, reporting is that the Ukrainian losses have been more than 845 troops killed and wounded, 3 tanks, 13 armoured fighting vehicles, 17 motor vehicles, and 12 field artillery guns, as well as 1 Grad MLRS vehicle. In the Zaporozhye direction, here fighting again continues around Verbova, Rabotino. Now, some reporting I saw today was that the Ukrainians had made an assault on Rabotino and Verbova. That assault had been repelled, was unsuccessful. And furthermore, the tentative early reporting was that the Russians had been able to effectively push back and chase the Ukrainian retreat and had gained a kilometre of land in that area. Now, I don't know if that's a temporary gain, if they're going to be able to hold that land, or what the area they've actually captured is. There may be nothing there but fields, and they may just themselves retreat back out of there. But again, more and more reports of Russian gains along the front line. In the Zaporozhye region, 260 Ukrainian troops reported killed or wounded this week, 6 armoured fighting vehicles, 15 motor vehicles, and 5 field artillery guns. Again, just adding to the number of artillery pieces reportedly being lost. Now, with nations reducing their material aid to Ukraine, and with most nations who are providing aid in terms of equipment, pivoting, it seems, to be looking for air defence systems, these losses in artillery pieces are going to become more and more difficult for the Ukrainians to replace. And at some point, there's just an overload. A saturation level is met where they decreased their artillery capability to such an extent that they really can't fight back. And then you will start to see a rapid decline, or we will start to see more and more retreats from Ukrainian locations as they evacuate back to positions where they may have built some further defensive capabilities and are able to hold the Russian approaches off. In the Kherson direction, where fighting has been ongoing for the last few weeks around Krinky, in this terribly it appears wasteful attempt to gain some level of PR success by saying that Ukrainian forces have established a bridgehead over the Dnieper River in the Kherson region. But it has just been a nightmare for the Ukrainian forces in Krinky over the last couple of weeks. The footage showing Fab 500 bombs landing on this small area that they're trying to hold. Reports from Ukrainian soldiers who Alexander Makuris on his show earlier this week read through one of those. And it's just hell. Hearing him talk about the fact that they have no way to evacuate their wounded. They're leaving their dead behind. There's just no way to get them back. Their boats trying to get across the river are being destroyed as they come across the river and being destroyed as they try to go back. He was successfully rotated out of what he called hell, and now he's received his orders that he needs to go back, and he just feels like he's facing most likely his death if he goes back into that Krinky region. The Ukrainian forces that are there aren't successfully creating a beachhead. They're not expanding into great areas. They're not pushing back the Russians and advancing and taking more and more. They are fighting and scrambling to hold a little section just across the river where it's very difficult for them to resupply. Again, the reports are there by the Ukrainians that the Russians just have so many drones in the air. We've got reports from a fortnight ago, the first reports coming out now of night vision capabilities on these FPV drones, and that now nighttime attacks by these FPV drones are taking place in the Kherson region, and not only in Kherson, in other regions, but the video started coming out of Kherson and Krinky. So, these poor Ukrainian soldiers are there, and at night, when they would have in the past perhaps had some cover and ability to move and get across the river undetected, now they've lost that ability as well, it seems. So in the Kherson, reporting is that in the last week, over 350 Ukrainian troops killed or wounded. And remember that this is a very small area that they are in. 13 field artillery guns, 17 motor vehicles, and 21 boats destroyed. Across the entire front line, the Russian Ministry of Defense reports that 5 Ukrainian aircraft were shot down this week, 3 MiG-29s and 2 Su-25s, 1 Mi-8 helicopter. And in terms of missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles, they report 11 HIMARS projectiles shot down, 2 HARM anti-radiation missiles shot down, 2 S-200 converted surface-to-surface missiles. The S-200s are normally surface-to-air missiles, but they have been converted by the Ukrainians to use them as a surface-to-surface weapon. And 1 JDAM aerial bomb shot down as well as 224 Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles. Now, these, I believe, are the larger ones, not just FPV drones, but larger unmanned aerial vehicles of all types. Reports that 12 Ukrainian servicemen were taken prisoner during the week. So in total there, in summary, across that week, if these numbers are correct, again, it's nearly 5,000 troops killed and wounded this week. 4,940 if you count up the numbers that were given by the Ministry of Defence there, and 63 artillery pieces. So that's, it's at 9 a day, 9 artillery pieces a day being lost. At the rate of nearly 5,000 troops a week, that's 260,000 Ukrainian troops killed or wounded in a year, is what those numbers are tracking towards if that continues. And it's been like that at that level now for a number of weeks in a row, sometimes over 5,000, sometimes just under. But that seems to be the rough level at the moment. I don't know how many troops killed and wounded the Russians are losing, but I can only imagine that it's a fraction, perhaps an order of magnitude less than that. We might be talking 490 Russian soldiers killed and wounded, and comparing that to 4,900. And the reason I say that is just because of all these overloads, outmatchings that the Russians have in aircraft and ability to fire missiles, and in artillery and drone capability and heavy flamethrower systems. All of these things just logically indicate that the Russian forces are not suffering at the same levels that the Ukrainians are. And so if the Ukrainian numbers are at 5,000 a week, then I'm sure the Russian numbers are far, far lower than that. That also has to have a huge effect on morale. If the Russians aren't losing such devastating numbers as to be thinking, oh my God, I'm going to my certain death here, their morale is likely to be far higher, as opposed to Ukrainians like the guy reporting from Kharkov, who's just saying he just wanted anything at all to get out of there, to get out of hell, and now he's been sent back to hell. And I didn't get the impression that he was eager to grab a knife between his teeth and go and fight. He was just looking to find a way to survive, and I imagine many of the men there are like that as well. That actual combat, as frostbite sets in, the frosts and the snow and the freezing temperatures are coming in those wetland areas just over the river. I think those men are just trying to survive. They're questioning why they're there, questioning their leadership about that. Anyhow, so for the front line, that's what's been going on. In terms of the leadership in Ukraine, now President Zelensky seems to be facing more and more competitors for his position. Andrei Yermak now being touted as another possible successor to Zelensky. He is the head of the Office of the President for Ukraine. They have known each other for a while. He's a lawyer and has worked in the film industry. I believe he met President Zelensky when they were film producers some time ago. When Zelensky became president, he asked him to join part of his team, and he's now the head of his Office of the President. Reports are that coming out in some Italian papers that Yermak may be considered someone to be a more stable successor for Zelensky. someone that could perhaps be involved in elections if elections were to be held, and may actually gain the vote, which I guess the US would then like that if they could say, look, we had a democratic election and he was voted in, so we can support him. He can then go and negotiate with the Russians. Anyhow, but there's him, there's a growing number. There's Arestovich, Putin's ex-advisor, who's been fired. Arestovich taking a very different line to Zelensky. He's now calling out openly what everyone with their eyes open is saying, is that the losses are tremendous to the Ukrainians, is that they can't win this fight. The offensive was a failure. Arestovich is saying these things now, looking to take that angle to perhaps make a run for presidency. Kirilo Budanov, the head of the military intelligence, reports coming out that he may even now be positioning himself for presidency. And then, of course, Valery Zaluzhny, General Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian military throughout this war. As I mentioned, I'll just talk about it now. Last week, reportedly, President Zelensky demanded that he resign. He had sent his representatives to him to speak to him, to say, look, you've got to go. You either need to say that you're going to fake an illness or something, or of your own free will, but it's got to look like you and not me firing you, because it would look bad if Zelensky was seen to fire him when Zaluzhny has reportedly still quite good support from the military. And as someone said recently, if it's in a coup, I back the guy with the guns. And so Zaluzhny, if there were to be a coup attempt, he is the guy with the guns in this situation. Apparently, Zaluzhny outright refused to leave and had said, I believe this is said to be a quote from him, "I myself will not leave. If you're personally dissatisfied with me, fire me. But this will be your personal decision for which you will have to answer." So he's just straight out said to his commanding officer and to the president, I'm not going. If you want me to go, fire me, and then deal with that. There is talk that there's a threat from Zaluzhny to Zelensky that if he does fire him, that may then result in a coup, where Zaluzhny will just turn to his other generals and say, enough of this clown, let's take over and take control. I've got the support of the public and the military. We will just take control, and then we would see what would happen from there. Zaluzhny clearly not having the same ties to the West as Zelensky does. Yes, of course he does. He's very closely aligned with them, has a lot of support from them, but not the same sort of political ties that Zelensky has in his dealings with Joe Biden, for example. Look, in terms of news in Ukraine, even on the front of tanks there, more Leopard 2s have been captured. Now, Leopard 2s being destroyed is one thing. Leopard 2s being captured is a whole nother problem. When a tank like that is captured in working order, it's immediately taken back to Moscow to a team of engineers who then just unpick the tank to understand exactly how it works, where its weak spots are, where it's strong, where it's done something smart or clever, where it's done something which the Russians think they could leverage in future battles with them. So short of handing over the user manual, which may or may not be in a tank, I don't know, I'm not a tanker, so much information is lost. And so much so that now reports are that the Americans are saying that the Abrams are not to be taken to the front line. Now, the same thing happened with the Challenger tanks, the British Challengers, when they were sent out. For months, they were in country, and there was no sign of them. Now, just recently, there has been some pictures of them. A couple of them have been, reportedly at least one has been destroyed. So now it seems the Americans are taking the same approach here and just saying, no, we've said you can have some Abrams, and I think 10 of them have been in country since September. It's now December. We haven't seen them fighting anywhere yet, and we may not. And it's interesting, isn't it, that the supposedly best tank on the planet isn't allowed to go and fight, because if it does get destroyed, it will ruin its image and ruin the likelihood of its sales. And, God forbid for the American manufacturers of the Abrams that it got into a one-on-one fight with a Russian tank, because then the PR would just be so bad. If it was a one-on-one fight between an Abrams and a T-90 or something, and the T-91, you can just imagine in the military arms sales of nations who are deciding whether they should buy Western US equipment or stuff from the Russians. They'd be like, well, we're not going to buy those Abrams. We've just seen one blown up by a T-90. You can see why they don't want them at the front line, because there's a good chance that sort of thing will happen. Other difficulties for Ukraine. So Poland, for over a month now, its truckers have been enforcing blockades at the border with Ukraine and only allowing through particular military aid and humanitarian aid, but blocking other products. They're doing this because reportedly the Ukrainian truck drivers are operating at far lower fees than the Polish truck drivers can, and so they feel that their business and livelihood is being undermined by these cut-rate Ukrainian trucking carrier services. This is now extended to Hungary, and with reports that Hungary has now started to enforce blockades on the border, and for the same reason, concerns that their trucking industry will be undermined by the cheap prices from the Ukrainian truckers. So this is problematic. In this area of Ukraine, you've got Poland, you've got Slovakia, you've got Hungary, and then you've got Romania and Moldova, then bordering all of that southern western area of Ukraine. With Poland and Hungary now, their truckers putting blockades in there, you must think that a nation like Slovakia and Romania is now starting to look and go, well, we're probably suffering from the same problem. Maybe the truckers there are like, you know what, we might do the same, because if they can't move freight through Poland and Hungary, good chance is they're going to try and push it through us, and that means less money for our truckers. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see this grow, and over the coming weeks, reports that Slovakia and perhaps Romania also starting to cause troubles for Ukraine on the borders in terms of getting products in and out of the nation. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, in an interesting piece of, I don't know what you call it, doublespeak or nonsense, has said that Russia has cut off Europe's energy supply. It was the Russian president who cut off the supply of gas through an operational pipeline. This has consequences for energy prices, he said. I don't know. All the information I've seen is that the pipe streams and Nord pipelines were blown up. There seems to be some indication that it was an American job that did that. Many people at the time said if Russia had wanted to do that, Russia could have just turned off the switch and stopped the gas flowing. But they didn't. Someone blew up the pipeline. Russia had no need to blow up the pipeline to stop the flow. Now, if somebody else who wasn't Russia, who didn't have control of the tap, wanted to stop the flow, then blowing up the pipeline would be a way to do that. But Scholz has come out and said, yes, it was the Russian president who cut off the supply of gas. It's an interesting sort of speech that he's given. So German aid to Ukraine, humanitarian, financial and military combined, has exceeded 25 billion euros since February 2022. This last month, they were reporting that they intend to increase aid from 4 billion to 8 billion in 2024, but they haven't actually set out a budget yet or agreed a budget yet. So, and that's because they have fiscal problems. It's not known if that 4 or 8 billion will be coming in 2024. And according to the Institute of World Economy, based in Kiel, Germany, the volume of aid promised to Kiev by their Western partners decreased by 90% in August to October compared to the same period in 2022. So going into 2024, almost a 90% drop in funding. Now, as we know, the American Congress has just this week, the Senate has voted to not approve and let through a almost an omnibus type funding bill, which would have provided funding for Ukraine and Israel. They've pushed back on that and said that that funding won't be allowed to occur until there is concrete movement from the Democrats in terms of strengthening the southern border and ensuring that they don't ensuring that something is done there to stop the influx of undocumented immigrants. Now, that's a real problem for the Democrats to agree to that, as I've talked about before. Democrats see the open border as a way for them to gain voters. Now, presently, it's reported that up to 10,000 people a day are crossing the southern border from Mexico, between Mexico and the US. 3.5 million people a year. If that continues for 10 years, there's another 30 million people. And because the Democrats are saying, no, come across, land of the free, bring us your, come in. And the Republicans are going, no, we've got to stop this. We've got to build a wall. This isn't good for our country. The logic is that those people will tend to become Democratic voters. Now, Dick Durbin, Democratic senator, has this week said he would like to support a bill which would allow for undocumented or illegal immigrants into America to go and join the armed forces, and as long as they pass some background checks, and no indication of what those background checks are or how stringent they might be, as long as they pass them, they can serve for the American military, and if they serve the American military, they will then be given US citizenship. And again, you can see how this then works for the Democrats to turn those illegal people coming to America into Democratic voters. So the Republicans have, and they're not stupid. They recognise this, and so they've said, well, look, if you want this funding, $60 billion or more for Ukraine and $16 billion for Israel, well, then you need to work on this border with us. So at this stage, the Ukraine is not looking like getting that money. As I said, the way that the Congress operates in the US, by next Friday of this coming week, they shut down for the end of year. A new Congress forms on the 3rd of January, but if it's anything like the start of this year, January 2023, the new Congress didn't actually get together and start to work until late in the month, around the 21st or 23rd of January. So it might be some 6 weeks from now before another opportunity for a decision on this is made. And President Zelensky's wife has come out today in an interview saying that immediate aid is crucial, vital for Ukraine now in order for it to continue to survive. And part of that is the $16 billion of that 60, which was earmarked for the public service, just for paying wages and paying for the people who run the country. If that money dries up, then your public services start to fail, water, power, gas, mail, roading, all of that starts to stop, and the country just breaks down. So if this decision doesn't come for another 6 weeks, this is where we might find that in 6 weeks' time, there's no decision to be made. It may be just too late for Ukraine. It may have all fallen apart. There may have been a coup by then. Zelensky may be in power, and Zelensky may be willing to sit down and negotiate. Who knows? Right, let's move on and talk a little bit about Israel now. I'm just going to start with a little bit of just a summary of reporting. This comes from Rybar on Telegram and Twitter. You can check them out. They have very good summaries of information all the time. I'm just going to read through a couple of points from there to give an overview. Their reporting says that Israeli troops are continuing ground operations in the Gaza Strip. In the northern part of the enclave, the Israelis are attempting to advance in the Sheikh Radwan and Al Judaida areas, which provide the shortest route to the centre of the city. Simultaneously, fighting persists on the outskirts of Bet Lahia and Jabaliyah. In the southern region, remember initially the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, were operating in the northern area of Gaza. They had, early in the piece, given 24 hours warning and said, move, if you live in northern Gaza, move, get out to southern Gaza if you don't want to be involved in this, what's going to happen, this bombing that's going to happen. Push people to the south. Now the Israelis are moving their operations into the south as well, really leaving nowhere for the civilians of Gaza to go in safety. Anyhow, so simultaneously fighting, in the southern region, Rebar reporting, there's been no significant changes in the past 24 hours. The Israeli Defense Forces are still trying to expand their control zone on the approaches to Khan Yunis, while Palestinian groups respond with incursions and ambushes. Meanwhile, in the city itself, the problem of hospitals' efficiency, unable to assist all the victims, has worsened. There's videos coming out today of some of this fighting going on in these areas around Khan Yunis. Some of the video is filmed by civilians from their apartment block windows, but you can just hear the fighting going on in the streets around them. And you can only imagine how terrifying that must be if you've got children and you can hear that. As an example, my kids are quite young. Today, a police siren went past outside and a police helicopter was circling around for a little while. And my wife came down before she headed out and said, "I just checked the kids, they're upstairs, but they're a little scared." And I said, "Why?" They said, "Oh, because they've heard the police car going past the siren and the helicopter flying around." So can you imagine what little kids are feeling like after a month, 2 months of nightly, daily bombing, apartment blocks being blown up around them? It's just horrible what's happening for these kids. Anyhow, the hospitals in the southern areas now are losing their efficiency and unable to assist people, and that's becoming worse. Rybar goes on to report that on the Israeli-Lebanese border, the intensity of shelling has slightly decreased compared to yesterday. Hezbollah claimed responsibility for attacks on the Israeli military bases Beranit and Avivim, as well as the border kibbutzim. In response, the Israelis targeted at least 10 populated areas in southern Lebanon. The tense situation persists in Syria and Iraq, where pro-Iranian proxies remain active. Yesterday, Shiite groups launched at least 10 attacks on US military bases, including Ain al-Assad, al-Shaddadi, Omar, as well as facilities at Karab al-Jih and Erbil airports. Today, 4 more attacks were reported. So constant attacks on American bases. In Iraq, the Abu Ali al-Askari, the leader of Kataib Hezbollah, said strikes will continue on US bases, including the embassy, until US forces leave Iraq. So continued tensions, growing tensions, perhaps, in the Middle East. I'm going to get down to in just a moment the UN Security Council resolution, and we'll talk about that, but how it seems that yet another opportunity to diffuse things has been missed in this area, and what the consequences of that will be, well, I guess we will see in the coming weeks. Now, while the US hasn't been able to give that $16 billion to Israel, or not get it approved yet, they still have some ability to provide assistance, and the US State Department has announced that it will be providing $106 million, or it would be making a sale of $106 million to Israel for 14,000 120mm tank shells. So these aren't artillery shells, not the 155mm artillery shells. These are tank shells. Some of the Democratic lawmakers have discussed that in order for the 16 or $14 billion of Israeli funding to go ahead, that it needs to be contingent upon concrete steps by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on having his military reduce civilian casualties. This is not going on at this stage. Israel is just proceeding with its bombing campaign without, it seems, making any particular concessions to the United States in terms of addressing that concern about reducing civilian fatalities. For Benjamin Netanyahu, growing problems here. About 5,000 Israeli soldiers have been injured since the beginning of the war. 2,000 of those people at least considered to be disabled now. This is reported by Yedioth Ahronoth, the Hebrew newspaper. So I'm imagining that's a reliable source for this sort of information. 5,000 Israeli soldiers have been injured during this conflict. There are videos coming out yesterday and today of mass arrests of Palestinian men, and reports from some Israeli sources that they don't know if these people they are arresting are Hamas fighters or just civilians, but large groups of men, videos of them being stripped to their underpants and then marched along. There is growing tensions between the Yemeni Houthis. Benjamin Netanyahu has come out reportedly and said to President Biden and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz that Israel will take military actions against the Yemeni Houthis if the United States don't. Now, the Houthis have hijacked and captured the Galaxy Leader, a freighter related to Israel. They have made attacks on some other commercial vessels around the Red Sea, Sea of Oman area. And there have been reports that an American destroyer in the area has shot down missiles from the Houthis. Now, it's an interesting statement from Netanyahu, which I think does demonstrate the expectation that the US will fight a lot of this battle for Israel, where Netanyahu has apparently told Biden that we will start military action against the Yemenis if you don't sort it out. Now, it's interesting. It's I've got a feeling of a bit of the tail wagging the dog there. But anyhow, that conflict is still growing in that area. Now onto the Security Council. So UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he has invoked Article 99. Now, Article 99 allows him as the Secretary General to bring to the attention of the Security Council matters in which, in his opinion, he thinks may threaten the maintenance of international peace and security. So he's done that. It's only been invoked 4 times in the past. Once in the Congo in the 60s, East Pakistan in the early 70s, Iran in 1979, and in Lebanon in 1989. The reason he has done this is because of the more than 17,000 Palestinians in Gaza that have been killed, along with another 7,500 missing. So putting, those numbers, you're getting up to 25,000 people in a 2-month period. Guterres has said that nowhere in Gaza is safe anymore for civilians. Had this Article 99 been successful, and the vote has just happened on it, and it was not successful because the United States vetoed it. So this would have effectively allowed the United Nations, the Security Council, to either take military action to stop this, or to impose sanctions against Israel, for example, to stop this. Now, it has been vetoed by the United States, and the UK abstained and didn't vote. Everyone else voted for it. So just some of the to give you an idea of the response to that from a few leaders and groups here. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said, the US president has described the American position as aggressive and immoral, a flagrant violation of all humanitarian principles and values, and holds the United States responsible for the bloodshed of Palestinian children, women, and elderly people in the Gaza Strip. Amnesty International, Agnes Callamard, she said this displays a callous disregard for civilian suffering in the face of a staggering death toll. She went on to say that the US has brazenly wielded and weaponized its veto to strong-arm the UN Security Council, further undermining its credibility and ability to live up to its mandate to maintain international peace and security. Israel's UN ambassador, Gilad Erdan, has said a ceasefire will only be possible with the return of all the hostages and the destruction of Hamas. Now, as we know, the destruction of Hamas is something that the Israelis are not going to be able to achieve unless they do kill everyone in Gaza. And even then, it's not going to stop Hamas. Hamas is an idea. It needs to be defeated with a better idea. By killing people who believe in the idea of Hamas, you're just going to kill those people. So effectively, the Israeli ambassador to the UN has said there will not be a ceasefire. It will not be possible. Médecins Sans Frontières, or Doctors Without Borders, their executive director, Avril Benoit, has said, by vetoing this resolution, the US stands alone in casting its vote against humanity. The US veto stands in sharp contrast to the values it professes to uphold. By continuing to provide diplomatic cover for the ongoing atrocities in Gaza, the US is signalling that international humanitarian law can be applied selectively, and that the lives of some people matter less than the lives of other. This US veto makes it complicit in the carnage in Gaza. Iran's foreign minister, Hossein Amirabdollahian, as long as America supports the crimes of the Zionist regime and the continuation of the war, there is a possibility of an uncontrollable explosion in the situation of the region. This is what I'm getting at here with this opportunity for the US to be seen to be being a dampening force and calming things down. And, actually being seen to be, okay, Israel, you're going too far here. We're going to agree with this UN Security Council resolution and we'll water them down, but we'll put some sanctions on you. At least it looks like we're doing the right thing here. That opportunity has been missed, which means that Israel is again in this position of just continuing its bombing campaign and perhaps damaging itself, going too far and just growing anger and condemnation of itself, which may lead to a conflict. Or here, as the Iranian foreign minister has said, the possibility of an uncontrollable explosion in the situation of the region. And this is possible. You've got the Houthis to the south of Israel. You've got Lebanon and Hezbollah to the north. Syria, just to the east, you've got Hamas, obviously, in Gaza itself, and then Iran, and then possibly Turkey, all around the area. So the possibility of an explosion is real. Russian US Ambassador Dmitry Polyansky said, our colleagues from the USA have literally before our eyes issued a death sentence to thousands, if not tens of thousands more civilians in Palestine and Israel. And finally, from China, so China's permanent representative to the UN, Zhang Jun, condoning the continuation of fighting while claiming to care about the lives and safety of people in Gaza is self-contradictory. Condoning the continuation of fighting while advocating for the prevention of the spillover effects of the conflict is self-deceiving. Condoning the continuation of fighting while making references to the protection of women and children and human rights is hypocritical. All these once again show us what double standards are. So, this opportunity for the US to be seen in a more positive light around controlling Israel in this conflict with Hamas has been missed. And to me, anyhow, feels like this is an advancement down the road to a further, wider conflict. This is the sort of thing which, as you can see, across the board from all nations other than Israel, the United States and the UK, condemnation of this, and in strong terms, and in terms talking about the death of women and children. this is going to be seen by the Arab and Muslim leaders of the world as just another sign of the US being on Israel's side and not helping to find a resolution to this problem at all. So where do we go? That's a good question. You see the damage here of international institutions being undermined. In this case, we're a UN Security Council, which is meant to be there to protect peace and security, and then one of the permanent members, the US, vetoing a vote to protect peace and security in an area, weakens the position of that institution. So growing conflict, a real likelihood in the coming weeks and months we will see an escalation in Israel and the Middle East. Okay, I'm going to leave it there for today. I think if you've watched the show, I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll try to get another one of these out in a day or so I look forward to talking to you again then.